What happens when a movie is just too much for the world to handle? Animated films are supposed to be safe escapes, right? Think again. These 10 movies didn't just spark outrage, they got yanked right out of theaters. Banned, protested, erased, or censored before the popcorn even cooled. What does it take for a cartoon to get pulled from the big screen? Let's count down the wildest, weirdest, and most controversial animated movies that crossed the line, sometimes in ways you'd never expect. Song of the South, 1946. Step into the Disney vault and you'll find a film so radioactive the company still pretends it doesn't exist. Song of the South isn't just controversial, it's the blueprint for how to vanish a movie. When this part live-action, part animated musical hit theaters in 1946, it was supposed to be a feel-good celebration of Southern folklore. Instead, it triggered a firestorm that's still smoldering more than 7 decades later. The film follows young Johnny and his magical trips with Uncle Remus, a black sharecropper spinning tales of Brer Rabbit and friends. On the surface, it's all catchy songs and cheerful rabbits. But look closer and you'll see why audiences, and eventually Disney itself, flinched. The movie's syrupy nostalgia for post-Civil War plantation life, its stereotyped depictions, and its stubborn refusal to mention slavery by name sparked immediate protest. Civil rights groups slammed it for romanticizing a time of brutal oppression. Critics accused it of whitewashing history and making light of the real pain behind those zip-a-dee-doo-dah smiles. The backlash was swift. Some theaters refused to show the film at all. Others caved under community pressure and pulled it after heated protests. Even when it was re-released in the 1950s and 80s, the controversies only deepened. As the civil rights movement gained momentum, Song of the South became a cultural lightning rod, with Disney quietly pulling it from circulation in the U.S. permanently. To this day, the company refuses to release it on streaming or home video in America. Want to see it? Good luck. You'll have to hunt for bootleg VHS tapes, laserdiscs from Japan, or grainy YouTube uploads. So, how does a movie become the industry's most infamous disappearing act? By crossing every line that history, culture, and basic decency can draw. And if you ever wondered why Disney's Splash Mountain ride had cartoon animals with no movie, well, now you know. Song of the South isn't just controversial, it's the ghost in Disney's attic, and it's not coming out to play. Fritz the Cat, 1972. If Disney gave us fairy tales, Ralph Bakshi's Fritz the Cat crashed the party and burned the storybooks. When it comes to controversy, nothing animated before or since has quite the same bite or the same ban record. Imagine a cartoon so outrageous, so gleefully offensive, that it became the first animated film to ever score an X rating from the MPAA. That's not a badge, that's a warning. Fritz the Cat is based on the underground comics of Robert Crumb, but Bakshi supercharges the anarchy, sex, drugs, revolution, and a total disregard for taboos. The movie is a fever dream of 1970s counterculture, following a horny, wisecracking feline through orgies, riots, and existential crises. Nothing is sacred. Race, politics, law enforcement, religion, even the idea of animation as kids' stuff. Fritz turns every cultural pressure point into a punchline or a provocation. The backlash was instant and global. In the U.S., some theaters flat out refused to show the film. In the U.K. and Europe, several cities and countries banned it outright. Even after edits, the X rating kept it out of mainstream theaters. Protests erupted from religious groups, politicians, and parent organizations who couldn't believe a cartoon could be this explicit or this influential. The film's satirical violence and graphic sexuality made headlines and, in some cases, made censors panic. Some prints were seized, others were hastily snipped or pulled mid-run after complaints. But here's the twist. All that outrage only made Fritz the Cat a legend. It grossed over $90 million worldwide on a shoestring budget, proving that animation could be dangerous, adult, and wildly profitable. Bakshi became the bad boy of animation, and Fritz turned into a midnight movie icon. So, what's the lesson? Sometimes breaking all the rules means you get kicked out of the club, and sometimes it means you build a whole new club next door. Fritz the Cat wasn't just pulled from theaters, it kicked the doors off the industry, for better or worse. Coonkin, 1975. You think one Ralph Bakshi film is enough controversy for a lifetime? Think again. Coonkin isn't just a movie that got pulled from theaters, it's a cultural bombshell that detonated on arrival. Released in 1975, this wild blend of animation and live action dared to take on racism, police brutality, and organized crime with a razor-sharp satirical edge. The result? Protests, outrage, and a cinematic vanishing act. At the heart of Coonkin is a no-holds-barred assault on America's ugliest stereotypes. Bakshi's film lampoons race relations using a surreal narrative about animal mobsters, an obvious riff on Song of the South, but with the gloves off. The imagery is intentionally provocative. Blackface, grotesque caricatures, and scenes that push every button society has. But here's the kicker. Bakshi's goal was to expose racism, not to pander to it. The problem? Not everyone got the memo. As soon as word got out, the National Urban League and other civil rights groups stormed theaters, labeling Coonkin as racist and dangerous. Protests erupted in major cities. Some screenings ended in near riots. United Artists, the film's distributor, panicked, pulling Coonkin from theaters in New York, Chicago, and L.A. just days after release. Even theaters that tried to stick it out often pulled the plug after community blowback or bomb threats. Critics were split. Some hailed the film as a bold work of social satire, calling it subversive, necessary, and decades ahead of its time. Others just saw another exploitation flick peddling shock for dollars. The controversy only grew over time, with the film oscillating between cult classic and cinematic pariah. Today, Coonkin is considered both a buried gem and a cautionary tale. It's a film that tested the limits of what animation could confront and paid the price by getting erased from the map. If Fritz the Cat got Bakshi invited to the party, Coonkin was the moment he got kicked out and told never to come back. Watership Down, 1978. On the surface, it's a story about rabbits. But don't be fooled. Watership Down is more nightmare fuel than bedtime story. Released in 1978, this British animated classic traumatized an entire generation and sent parents stampeding for refunds. Want proof that a G-rated film can get yanked from theaters? Ask anyone who watched this as a kid and still hears the screaming. Based on Richard Adams' best-selling novel, the film follows a group of rabbits fleeing the destruction of their warren. Sounds sweet until the fur starts flying. Literally. Blood, gore, and graphic violence play out in watercolor fields, all set to haunting music and existential dread. The villain, General Woundwort, makes Scar from The Lion King look like a stuffed toy. Scenes of rabbit-on-rabbit violence, death by snare, and slow-motion horror unfold in a style that's as gorgeous as it is disturbing. Critics love the artistry, but parents? Not so much. In the UK, the British Board of Film Classification gave Watership Down a U Universal, suitable for all, which is basically the same as a G rating in America. The result? Scores of unsuspecting families, some with toddlers, walked out in horror as bunnies were eviscerated on screen. Complaints poured into theaters, the BBFC, and newspapers. Some cinemas pulled the film from matinee slots or dropped it altogether, bowing to public outrage and bad press. The controversy didn't stop at borders. In the U.S. and Australia, similar stories emerged. Frightened children, angry parents, and a movie pulled from theaters just to save face. The lesson? Never underestimate the power of animation to unsettle, even when the stars have twitchy noses. Decades later, Watership Down is still used as shorthand for not all cartoons are for kids. It's both a masterpiece and a warning sign, forever famous as the film that proved cute animals can scar you for life, and sometimes get shown the exit by theaters who didn't read the fine print. The Plague Dogs, 1982. If you thought Watership Down was intense, imagine the same team doubling down on despair. The Plague Dogs is the other British animated film that made audiences run for the exits, only this time the subject matter is even darker and the controversy even louder. Adapted from another Richard Adams novel, The Plague Dogs follows two canines, Rolf and Snitter, as they escape from a government animal testing lab. Sounds heroic, but this isn't a feel-good adventure. The film is relentless in its depiction of suffering, showing graphic animal experiments, near drownings, and desperate survival against a bleak, unforgiving landscape. The animation style is muted, grim, and heartbreakingly realistic. There's no comic relief, no light at the end of the tunnel, just a gut punch of existential horror. Upon release, the backlash was immediate and brutal. Animal rights activists protested outside theaters, condemning the film for its unflinching realism. Parents, expecting a gentle cartoon, demanded refunds and wrote furious letters to local papers. In the UK, several theaters pulled The Plague Dogs within days, citing overwhelming complaints and traumatic walkouts. The U.S. release fared no better. Many cinemas refused to book the film after reading reviews or hearing advance word. What makes the story even wilder? The American version was heavily edited, cutting entire scenes to avoid an R rating, yet even that didn't save it from controversy. The film's reputation as an emotional wrecking ball only grew, with critics praising its artistry, but warning it was too much for almost anyone to handle. To this day, The Plague Dogs is hard to find, and most audiences have only seen censored or incomplete versions. So, how does a film go from acclaimed novel to box office ghost? By refusing to pull any punches, literally or figuratively, and by showing that sometimes the truth is just too raw for the big screen. The Plague Dogs got pulled because it crossed a line, and in doing so, it etched its own legend in animation history. When the Wind Blows, 1986. What if a cartoon could make you genuinely fear the end of the world? When the Wind Blows, a British animated film from 1986, did exactly that, and for some theaters it did too good a job. Adapted from Raymond Briggs's graphic novel, the film follows an elderly English couple trying to survive nuclear war, armed only with government pamphlets and a heartbreaking belief in the system. You expect talking animals, but what you get is a slow-motion disaster that's as haunting as it is human. When the Wind Blows hit cinemas, audiences were caught off guard by its bleakness. Gone were the gentle jokes and whimsy of other animated fare. Instead, viewers witnessed the slow unraveling of Jim and Hilda blogs as radioactive fallout seeps into their home and hope vanishes with the sunlight. David Bowie's haunting soundtrack didn't soften the blows. It deepened the chill. Children expecting a bedtime story were left stunned and, in many cases, traumatized. The reaction was swift. In the UK, letters flooded newspapers and local councils. Some theaters, especially those near military bases or in conservative areas, yanked the film after complaints about promoting fear or politicizing children's entertainment. School groups that had booked matinee showings abruptly canceled. Even in the U.S., where the Cold War paranoia was still bubbling, several independent cinemas pulled When the Wind Blows after angry parents demanded their money back and local media whipped up panic. Was the film anti-war? Absolutely. Was it inappropriate? That depends on your tolerance for realism and heartbreak. Critics praised its honesty, but box offices suffered as word spread about its devastating tone. Over the years, When the Wind Blows has become a cult classic, admired for its courage, but still seldom screened. Theaters may have pulled it, but its message lingers. Not every apocalypse comes with explosions and monsters. Sometimes the scariest thing is two people clinging to hope and finding out it's not enough. Feladay, 1994. If you thought talking cats meant family fun, Feladay is here to wreck your expectations, and maybe your sleep. This German animated film, released in 1994, is a gritty noir murder mystery wrapped in the fur of a house cat. The star, Francis, is a cynical feline who stumbles into a web of serial killings, cult rituals, and secrets that would make Silence of the Lambs blush. This is not a story about chasing yarn balls. This is a story about surviving the darkness. From the moment Feladay landed in German cinemas, controversy stalked its every frame. Graphic violence, cats disemboweled, throats slit, bodies piled, unfolds in beautifully rendered animation that tricks you into thinking it's safe. Add to that scenes of feline mating, religious fanaticism, and unsettling dream sequences, and you've got a cocktail guaranteed to shock. Some viewers and critics hailed it as a breakthrough, finally an adult animated thriller with real depth. But many more were horrified. Complaints poured in. Parents, misled by the poster's cute cats, rushed out of theaters dragging traumatized children behind them. Animal lovers called it exploitative and disturbing. In several European countries, theaters began quietly dropping the film, either in response to community outrage or, in some cases, direct pressure from local officials. Some cinema chains refused to book it at all once word got out, fearing the backlash. Yet Feladay didn't fade away. Instead, it developed a notorious afterlife, earning cult status among animation buffs and horror fans. The DVD became a must-have for those who like their cartoons with claws. The film's unflinching depiction of violence and sex challenged everything audiences expected from animation, and proved once again that not all animated features are for kids. For theaters, it was a risky bet, and for many, a bet not worth taking. Feladay might be hard to find, but once you've seen it, you'll never forget it. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, 1999. Think a cartoon musical can't shake up an entire country? Enter South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. When Trey Parker and Matt Stone unleashed their foul-mouthed, R-rated opus in 1999, nobody was ready for the sheer scale of its profanity, parody, and punchlines. This wasn't just a movie. It was a declaration of war on censorship, hypocrisy, and anyone who dared underestimate animated comedy. From the opening notes, South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut went for the jugular. The kids of South Park, Colorado, dropped more F-bombs in one scene than most movies manage in an hour. The plot? A satire of the outrage over offensive cartoons, with Canada and the U.S. spiraling into a literal war after the boys sneak into a dirty movie. Songs lampooning parents, government, and even Satan, who's in a relationship with Saddam Hussein, naturally kept censors working overtime. The controversy was instant and volcanic. In the U.S., theaters in conservative regions pulled the film after complaints from parents, religious groups, and, in some cases, local politicians. Some cinemas faced protests and threats of boycott. In Canada, things got even wilder. Several provinces banned or pulled the film outright, citing its dangerously subversive content and relentless vulgarity. Even the MPAA initially threatened an NC-17 rating, only relenting after Parker and Stone cut some of the most extreme scenes, though, let's be real, plenty survived. Yet all this outrage only fueled the fire. The movie became a box office hit, with audiences packing theaters just to see what all the fuss was about. Critics called it a blistering masterpiece of satire, and the Academy nominated it for Best Original Song. But for some theaters, the heat was just too much. Pulling South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut became an act of self-preservation. If you ever doubted that animation can cause as much trouble as live action, look no further. This wasn't just a cartoon, it was a cultural earthquake, and for theaters that couldn't handle the tremors, pulling the film was the only option. Percipilus, 2007. Sometimes controversy isn't just about what's on the screen, but where it's shown. Percipilus, a stunning black-and-white animated adaptation of Marjane Satrapi's graphic memoir, drew international acclaim for its unflinching look at growing up during the Iranian Revolution. But the very honesty that won it awards also made it a target, and in some places, an immediate casualty of censorship. The story follows Marjane from her rebellious childhood in Tehran through war exile, and self-discovery in Europe. It's personal, political, and unapologetically real, depicting government oppression, religious hypocrisy, and the cost of dissent. For many audiences, Percipilus was an eye-opener. For hardliners in Iran and beyond, it was a threat. Before the film even hit theaters in Iran, the government condemned it as anti-Islamic and insulting to the nation. Any hope for a domestic screening vanished. But the backlash didn't stop at the border. In Lebanon, protests erupted and screenings were quickly pulled in response to pressure from religious leaders. The same happened in Tunisia, where the film was yanked after just a handful of showings. Even in France, Satrapi's adopted home, ultra-conservative groups attempted to get the film pulled, though they ultimately failed. What made Percipilus dangerous was its courage. It dared to show the revolution not as propaganda, but as a lived experience, full of heartbreak, absurdity, and rebellion. For some theaters, this honesty was simply too risky. Pulled from schedules and sometimes even banned, Percipilus became a symbol of the struggle for free expression. Today, it's celebrated as a landmark in adult animation, taught in schools and praised by critics worldwide. But its journey from screen to shelf is a stark reminder. For some stories, the most dangerous thing isn't what happens in the movie, but what happens when people see themselves, unfiltered, in the frame. Sausage Party 2016. If you thought food couldn't offend, Sausage Party was here to prove you wrong, on every level. Released in 2016, this Seth Rogen-penned CGI romp starts as a Pixar parody and ends as one of the most jaw-dropping, boundary-shredding animated films ever made. Think raunchy jokes, sexual innuendo, and religious satire cranked up to 11. Sausage Party didn't just flirt with controversy, it served it up on a platter. The movie's plot is pure insanity. Food items in a supermarket discover their fate is to be eaten, and their journey turns into a wild odyssey of sex, violence, and existential crisis. The cast of characters, hot dogs, buns, bagels, and more, embark on a quest loaded with F-bombs and X-rated gags. What starts as supermarket fun escalates into an orgy of crude humor and taboo-breaking spectacle, with animated food simulating acts that left jaws on the theater floor. Predictably, outrage followed. In the U.S., several theater chains in conservative regions pulled the film after a deluge of complaints. Religious groups called it blasphemous, parents screamed false advertising, and some cinemas even faced local bans. But the controversy went global. In the Middle East, South America, and parts of Asia, Sausage Party was banned outright or pulled from screens within days of its premiere. Even the film's creators admitted they didn't expect quite this level of fallout. The heat didn't stop with the content. Reports surfaced that animators were overworked, underpaid, and threatened with blacklisting if they spoke up, igniting a second wave of controversy that made headlines worldwide. For many theaters, keeping Sausage Party on the marquee just wasn't worth the hassle. Yet, as with so many pulled films, the drama only made Sausage Party a bigger hit. The movie grossed over $140 million and became a cult favorite among adults who wanted their animation with an extra dash of anarchy. Love it or hate it, you can't deny its impact. When a movie manages to offend almost everyone and still packs the seats, you know it's crossed into legend. Sausage Party wasn't just controversial, it was the wild party some theaters never wanted to host. So after all that outrage, walkouts, and bans, what's the real takeaway? Animation isn't just for kids, and sometimes it's just too real, too wild, or too honest for theaters to handle. Which of these movies shocked you the most? Did any of them deserve to be pulled, or did audiences overreact? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and share this video if you love stories that push the boundaries. Until next time, remember, cartoons can still shake the world.